Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you are. Welcome back to another player review as I look at every single player that's moved clubs this off-season, whether it be a free agent or a trade. We tell you what we think it means for the departed club, for the new arrived club, and then from a fantasy, footy, and SuperCoach perspective, we give you my opinion on what that means, both for the player and also for the clubs around it. Let's talk about free agent now, Essendon Bomber, Ben McKay. He's departed the Kangaroos. He's now a Bomber. What does that mean? Well, for the Kangaroos, one, it gives them incredible draft capital and an absolute brilliant selection. They now own a really big chunk of the early parts of the draft, and they've got opportunities as really what I believe is the only club that could give any kind of assets that would interest West Coast to give up pick one. Regardless of whether or not that happens, they've got a beautiful draft hand, and if they don't get pick one, I can see them heading to the draft and getting themselves another great key position player. While there are a couple of nice midfielders early on in the draft, it very much is a key position draft, which when we look at North Melbourne and the departing of Ben McKay, we know this is a significant area of need for them. Their midfield is relatively stacked. You've got some great players rolling through there, led by LDU. Simpkin had a year of hell. You've got Powell that can roll through there. Phillips can roll through there. Sheasel, we saw experimented at times through the midfield. Taran Thomas has shown moments mid, forward, and back of the ball. They're fine for the midfield types. They really well and truly are. It's the key position prospects that they need to sort out. And while forward of the ball, they still is a need. Defensively, that is there. They don't have anything fantastic, and as much as Ben McKay is not worth pick 3 in a draft compensation space, he is going to be tough for them to replace. So there's a gap there. Whether or not they choose to believe they've got those stocks internally, I'm not so sure. I think they're going to need to head to the draft and pick up one of the great key position options that they can get there. There are some nice ones at the top of the draft in the defensive stock, especially. I'd be really surprised if they don't go down the pathway to look to secure one of them with one of their number of early picks. Whether it's 2 or 3, they've got a bunch of options, and I believe they'll use at least one first round selection on securing some key position draft young talent. What does it mean for Essendon? Well, a number of things. One, it kind of does a few things. Firstly, brings immediate experience into that backline. Zirk Thatcher likely departing to Port Adelaide. They're very different types, but what McKay does is it holds down a key position stopper spot, and it just guarantees that Jordan Ridley can stay in that intercepting position. We saw them use a variety of different options through that back 7. Zirk Thatcher was handy. Laverde did some really nice things. Even Langford at times, although he's better forward of the ball, we saw him sometimes over the past using that defensive line. But really for me, Essendon look better when they've got a lockdown stopper. I think Reed's going to be a really important piece of their future. They've spent a lot of draft capital and a lot of time developing him. If they can get his body right, I don't mind the tall stocks of their defensive line of a Reed and a McKay and of a Ridley. I think you've got some nice diversity, not just in height, but in different styles of play, and McKay is going to be the stopper. And so for me, I think from an Essendon perspective, this probably elevates their defensive line a little bit more. Yes, the loss of Zirk Thatcher is probably not ideal for them, but the replacement with McKay, although at different types of tall defenders, enables Ridley, who really sets up a lot of their play, to stay in that intercepting and quarterback role, which not just for SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy, but also for Essendon, I think is really important. So McKay in definitely improves their defensive line. I know a lot of people have been really critical on Ben, but the reality is, as much as he's not worth pick 3 at the draft, it's the compensation of what he's landed. But if you go and look at what he's done, he's actually shown over a period of time, he's developed into quite a solid, tall defender. Does do a pretty good job. He's certainly not in the elite category, in contrast to players like a Jacob Wiedering or a Harris Andrews. He's not like that, but he is quite a handy, tall stopper. And so I think Essendon will feel justified, given that they haven't had to pay anything but salary cap. I think they'll feel pretty happy about this. What does it mean from a fantasy footy perspective? Well, the reality is for Ben individually, he's never averaged more than mid-50s in AFL AFL Fantasy or mid-60s in SuperCoach. And so not only just for Classic, but in drafts in general, if you're looking for a player that is going to be priced at or cost you this sort of capital, it's just not someone you should be looking at. Look, maybe, this is a big maybe stretch, maybe if your draft league is a category league and spoils is one of the key markers that you've decided as a category scoring, then maybe if it's deep a league enough, Ben might start to come into consideration. But I think for the most part, he's not fantasy relevant for us in any of the formats, in any of the codings of how you like to play the game. You can jog on. From a North Melbourne perspective, I'm really interested to see how they structure up this defensive 6, this defensive 7. Aaron Hall's moving out. What does that mean? Ben McKay's moving out. What does that mean? Jack Zeebel's moved out. What does that mean? There's a lot of players that held a lot of key roles for this defensive line over the past period of time. We also know that Harry Sheezel, as brilliant as he's been in the back half, do they want to move him forward of the ball? That's where he was so dominant and prolific in his junior time, and he's been brilliant coming off half back. But do they need that class forward 50 entry, forward 50 conversion and scoreboard impacts more so than him in the rebounding? For me, that's going to be interesting. But look, someone else is going to get this opportunity to play the lockdown role, and key position players, whoever it is that sits here for North Melbourne, unless they're a basement price cow and we get desperate for options, I don't think the absence of Ben will help us whatsoever. The real financial benefit for us in SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy, and really SuperCoach, is that this should enable Jordan Ridley to stay freed up and not have to go back into that lockdown role. We've seen at previous eras when he's had to play that lockdown role, he's not been great for fantasy scoring. But I think people like Reed, if you can get fit, Jake Kelly, I think he might get squeezed out of the side soon enough, and that's only a good thing for Essendon. As much as Jake's a fantastic behind the scenes and cultural person, it's not going to be a long-term, this is the guy you want in your best 22. So I think Jordan Ridley could potentially be the gain here. I'm not sold it's going to see a significant spike in his scoring, but he's absolutely somebody that will benefit from this, with one more big key lockdown type tool enabling him to be stayed to play that free intercepting role. If anyone's winning out of the Ben McKay moving in or out, it's Jordan Ridley, but I'm not sold it's going to be enough that for classic or salary cap formats of SuperCoach or AFL Fantasy, it's going to bump him drastically high up the relevancy or rankings order. Do you agree or do you disagree on my take about Ben McKay and what it means for him and for the players about both clubs that he's arrived and departed from for SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy? You comment below and let me know. If you're enjoying these player reviews, we'd love you to make sure you've subscribed to the channel, turned on the notifications, and leave a like or a comment below. Every single player that moves clubs this off-season I'll be reviewing, and if you want to do more, you can check the playlist box right there, and we will make sure you get to see every single one of those players. Thanks for watching. We can't wait to talk with you about another player that's moved clubs this off-season.